this event sponsored by the Federation of Alliance Française USA. My name is Charles Coulon. I'm the president of Alliance Française DuPage. We're just outside Chicago, and I also serve on the Federation Board of Directors, serving on the Cultural Programs Committee. And I'd want to welcome you all here tonight to our program about the dance traditions from the corners of France, Le Bal Perdu. Melissa, yeah, if you want to go to the next slide, here's our quick movie. Voila, this is our latest promotional video that we just came up with here at the Federation. And again, we're the largest Alliance Française network in the world, and 25,000 learners of French each year in one of our member chapters from all around the US. So there's about 100 chapters in the US, so you can find your nearest one on our AFUSA website. There are links to that. Let's see. More events coming up soon. Very soon, in fact, we have Cara Black coming back to talk to us about her book, Murder at La Villette. And Adrian Leeds will also come back to our programming. Why living in France can cost half as much. So voila. So you can sign on to those, sign up for those. The RSVPs forms are live on the website. Okay, but for tonight, we will have everyone stay on mute during the course of the presentation, and we will go ahead and accept questions in the chat. We'll get them to them at the end of the presentation. I will be able to read them over to our presenter, and we are recording this event to share on our YouTube channel after the fact, okay? Expecting about a 1-hour runtime. So for tonight, it's my honor and privilege to introduce our speaker, Leslie Barr. I have personally met her when she came and taught a Balfolk workshop in Chicago, in the Chicago area, and she has been teaching she calls it the gospel of Balfolk in various regions of the US. She discovered the traditional music scene in the 80s. She taught music in a school environment, so she has the teaching and education background for that in ethnomusicology, and she's attended countless bals and learned the dances of many French regions as recently as last summer. And she has given quite a few different workshops. So I guess without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce Leslie Barr. Thank you so much.
Okay, I am going to share my screen, and I am going to cover up my video because I think it's easier for you to see what's going on if you're not looking at me talking. And also, as you probably can hear, I have a cold, and I don't need you all to see me blow my nose and cough. So here we go. I'm going to cover it up and share my screen, and we'll get going. And voila. Here we are. Okie doke. So today I'm going to give you an introduction to French traditional dance and dance music, which in France is often called musique et danse populaire. Popular as in of the people and not popular as in pop music. Knowing about these traditions provides a window into what life was like in small towns and villages and rural corners of France that are often overlooked when it comes to the larger story of French history and culture. I'm also going to tell you about how that village life and those traditions gradually changed, almost disappeared, and were revived in a new contemporary context. To start off, I'd like to show you some photographs of dancing in France from the turn of the 20th century, which is the earliest period from which we have extensive images. They are from picture postcards, which were hugely popular then. The bal in this photo is taking place just south of Paris. Bal champêtre means a dance out in the country. A bal is a dance or a place to dance. The verb to dance is danser, but you don't go to a dance, you go to a bal. I'll use the word bal a lot, but because everything else will be in English when it's plural, I'm going to say bals because otherwise it sounds awkward. There were many bal, right? So, this is a view of a branle, a very old type of dance from the Pyrenees between Pau and the Spanish border. This is in the Vendée on the coast southwest of Nantes, a ladies' chain. This is in the Alps near Gap, a rigodon. You can see the musician towards the left playing a harmonica. There he is. And a dance at a wedding in Finistère in far western Brittany. A bourrée in a village in the Auvergne. A fandango in the Basque country in the southwest. And finally, in a pose for the photo, a couple dance in Normandy with the accordion player standing on the right. You can see from this image and from the first one I showed you that the closer one is to Paris, the more modern the dances are. Of course, that's modern as in 19th century modern. So, a little geography and history for those of you who might not know. Historically, like most of the rest of Europe, France used to not be France, all unified into one country. There are many different political entities whose borders varied over time. Those entities comprised a lot of different cultures, often with different languages and traditions that were a response to their particular geography and history. Even when France's boundaries were much like they are today, many of these regions were isolated from the central government and from each other due to distance. Look how far north Paris is. Or terrain, mountains, rivers without bridges, and roads that were impassable much of the year. As a result, many people in such regions did not speak French or even think of themselves as French until, in some cases, the turn of the 20th century. So though I say French dance traditions, what we really have is many different cultures of dance and music. To orient you on the map, these are the regions where the dancing you saw in the postcards took place. Here's Brittany in the far northwest, very rural, far from everything. In the west, they spoke Breton, maybe some of them still speak, which is a Celtic language related to Cornish and Welsh, and not related to French. Just south of Brittany is the Vendée, one part marais or marsh, and another part bocage, which is pasture land divided into small hedged fields interspersed with groves of trees. And here is the Auvergne in the Massif Central, the Central Massif, mountainous and remote, where, like in the rest of southern France, people spoke Occitan, which is related to both Spanish and French, but is its own language. Occitan gives us the word for the region of Languedoc, Oc for Occitan, and versions of it were also spoken in Limousin, Gascony, Provence, and in the Alps. Here are the Pyrenees, and one corner of that border, the Basque country, with close ties to the Spanish País Vasco. They all spoke Basque, a language that's not related to any other language at all. And the bals that were near Paris were here and here. As one can imagine, the most isolated areas, whether by language or geography or both, kept their old traditions the longest. Consequently, those are the traditions we know the most about, and those are the ones I will focus on. They are circled here on the map. And just to give you a clearer picture, here's a map showing where various languages were spoken. We actually don't really know a lot about danse populaire much before the 19th century because there wasn't much interest in learning about or recording folk culture until then. But we do know that early on, people danced in circles. Circle dances reflect the collective nature of a traditional community. Everyone dances together. There's room for everyone to participate. The circle is closed, contributing to the sense of group identity, and all the dancers are doing the same steps in the same way. To our modern way of thinking, this might sound dull, but there's something very deep in giving yourself up to the rhythm of the group. Here are some examples of circle dancing. This one is in the Pyrenees, circa 1910. It might be a branle, but the card just says danse de pays, which only means it's a dance of that region. Here's a ronde from the Vendée. Maraîchine means it's from the people of the Marais Vendéen, the large area of marshland near the ocean. To give you an idea of what rondes were like, here's a video of a ronde danced last summer at the Basaltique Festival in Le Puy-en-Velay in Auvergne. It is, of course, like all the videos I will show you, out of the context of a village tradition, but still, it lets you see what it's like. Rondes could be danced to instrumental music, but as is true of a lot of early dancing, they were most often done to singing. I apologize in advance for the view. I was sitting on the floor. And here's another circle dance, this time from Brittany, called La Ride. Notice the kids in the middle of the circle and also the kids watching from the doorstep on the left. In a traditional society, that's how children learn to dance, by watching. No one needed a dance teacher. You'll see how that changes later on. This is a silent film from 1908 of a wedding in Brittany. You'll see the musicians, one playing a bombard, which is a type of oboe, and the other a biniou, the small Breton bagpipe. And then you'll see the people in their traditional dress dancing the ride, as well as part of another dance called a gavotte, where the couples move in a circle in a cortege formation with partners side by side. You'll notice various women staring at the camera. It must have been strange and amazing to be filmed in 1908. Before I play it, though, let me just note that if you're watching the recording of this talk on YouTube, this video might not be available. So I'll provide a link to it in the resource document that will be posted along with the recording so you can see it on your own. Remember, it is silent. I love that woman's expression. And this is what the bombard and biniou music sounds like. Okay, where are we? In this image of a wedding in Les Landes de Gascogne, south of Bordeaux, they're dancing a rondeau, the traditional dance of that region. It's a chain, a circle dance opened up. The musicians are on the right, a fiddler, an accordionist, and someone playing the local bagpipe, which is called a boa. And here is a modern example of a rondeau en chaîne. The chain here is short because the two men are demonstrating the dance at a workshop.
Farà vedi al lucero la mattina farà vedi al lucero la mattina vibra che a hueso se fuera que está nado vibra que a hueso se fuera que está nado farà vedi al lucero la mattina farà vedi al lucero la mattina vibra que a preso se fuera que está nado vibra que a preso se fuera que está nado.
Another old dance is the bourrée, of which there are many versions throughout central France. In this image, the music is being provided by a cabaret, the Auvergne bagpipe, and an accordion. As you've probably noticed, there are many different kinds of bagpipes in France, each belonging to a particular musical culture. There is some written evidence about the bourrée from the 18th century. Here's a description of a community dancing the bourrée from a 1789 book called Petit Jacques et Georgette ou les Petites Montagnardes Auvergnat. It was a novel for young people which recounted the story of two little Auvergnats who go singing and dancing in the streets to earn their living. As in many descriptions of peasant life, it's more than a little patronizing. The best musician stands and sings. Several women, when not their turn to dance, accompany him with their high voices, and all the rest, screaming with joy, jump and frolic heavily. There's nothing more pleasant than this spectacle. The giant sabots of the dancers, their big breeches, their leggings, the big round hats, all their costume, not really made for dancing, forms a picturesque tableau, ridiculous and yet touching. Note, it says they're dancing to singing. The old bourrées have lyrics in Occitan. That's how they were originally done. Also, in case you're not familiar with the word, sabot or wooden clogs. Here's a film of a three-time bourrée made in the early 1980s, when people who had grown up dancing them were still around. 3 times just means the meter is in 3 beats to a measure. While you're watching, notice the interaction between the dancers. Each one responds to what the other one does. So, those are some of the older dances. Older dances. In the 18th and early 19th century, a new style of dancing came in, dancing in lines and in squares. Pictured here is a dance from the Vendée called the avant-deux, which shows the strong influence of the contredanses and quadrilles that trickled down to the countryside from the Paris court and associated upper-class people who learned them from dancing masters starting in the late 17th century. Such dances were originally from England and were brought to the French court by an English dancing master, which then inspired a French dancing master to go to England to learn more. By later in the 19th century, they could be found in many regions. The spread of this new style of dancing reflects the way once extremely isolated places had become more open to outside influence. Here's a contemporary group doing a version of an avant-deux collected in a Poitou village in the late 1970s.
Imoulin. Rangez. Et en 4 points. Et grand rond de tout. Away.
If you've ever square danced, that will look very familiar. These people in the Land de Gascogne are ready to do a version of a congo, another dance descended from the quadrille. And here are people dancing another type of congo, also at the Basaltique Festival in Le Puy. I should mention too, the band is called Dirty Caps. As you can imagine, it's a big cultural change to go from a circle that included everyone to a small closed group with one-on-one interactions. In addition to knowing something about the dances, we also know some things about the context of dancing. In villages and rural areas, until more or less the mid-19th century, dancing was very local, connected to a wedding, a holiday or saint's day, or a celebration after communal work. They weren't public balls per se. Dancing was just a regular part of traditional communal life. In towns and cities, though, by the late 18th and early 19th century, there were public balls just for the sake of dancing. Here are some regulations about such balls from 1823 in the town of Saint-Amand in Berry, which is just north of the Auvergne in central France. With this attempt at laying down the rules, you learn a lot about what kind of anarchy might have been found at these events earlier. So, when balls are public, musicians must notify the mayor's office first, and after they have told the mayor, they must also notify the police. They must end by 9 in the winter and 10 in the summer. Games and jokes that could cause an uproar are expressly forbidden. Attendees must wear proper clothes and shoes. At balls where the music is played by violins, no sabots are allowed. However, at balls with the music played by hurdy-gurdies or bagpipes or other country instruments, sabots are allowed, but still it says, dancers should avoid as much as possible the noise made with these shoes. Remember, they're made of wood. One can only imagine the sound of all those feet knocking against a wooden floor. It's interesting to note that different kinds of instruments, violins versus country or the old traditional instruments, were assumed to bring out different groups of people from different levels of society. In case you've never heard of one before, this is a hurdy-gurdy, in French called a vielle à roue, or commonly just vielle. The crank turns a wheel, which rubs against the strings like a violin bow. The strings you can see are drones that play the same pitch all the time, and the ones that the keys will touch inside the black box play the melody. And these are a version of the bagpipes they referred to, les cornemuses du centre. Cornemuse means bagpipes, centre just means they're from the center of the country. These are quite large, but they do come in different sizes, which are measured using the old-fashioned word from the Bourbonnais, pouce, which means inches. Here's a little bit of a recording of a bagpipe and hurdy-gurdy playing together, just to give you the idea of what they sound like. They're playing a two-time bourrée, a bourrée in a meter of 2. In 1852, the novelist George Sand wrote about the old ways of Berry in her book Les Maîtres Sonneurs, or The Master Pipers. It's not ethnology, but at least gives an idea of what the music and dance culture had been like prior to the time she was writing, as the story clearly shows her nostalgia for what was passing away. In particular, it's interesting to note that at that earlier time, instrumental music was a profession, not for just anyone. Those who wanted to play had to save up to get an instrument. Prior to a time when instruments could be made anywhere and easily and safely shipped to buyers, for example, by train, instruments were not readily available. Once someone had an instrument, they had to go through an apprenticeship to study with a master. When they were ready to play professionally, they had to join a guild, a professional organization. To do so, they had to go before a jury, and if they were accepted, they were assigned a territory and could only play for money in that area. It was very regulated. This is a contract from 1851 for an apprentice to a piper, a young person going to learn the trade of piping. This is a passport for a hurdy-gurdy player to be itinerant, so he wouldn't be picked up as a vagrant, from 1858. And here is an example of an itinerant hurdy-gurdy player in the Morvan in Burgundy. It's hard to imagine what peasant life was like prior to the mid-19th century for some, and even up until the end of the 19th century for others. This photo was taken at the turn of the 20th century in Le Long de Gascogne in the southwest, and while it was certainly posed for effect, it still gives a glimpse of the challenges of rural life, especially in those areas like Le Long that stayed poor for a long time. Everyone living in one room, heat and light provided by the fireplace, with some light from the door if it could be left open without everybody freezing, few material goods, and animals in close proximity, as they were both a precious commodity and a source of warmth. But that rural life gradually modernized, leaving behind many of the hardships, but also leaving behind many aspects of local traditional culture and identity. The goal of the central government in Paris throughout the 19th century was to, quote unquote, civilize the countryside, homogenize the culture, and make everyone French rather than a paysan from the marshes of Les Landes, or a tiny village in Corrèze, or a fishing community on the rocky coast of Finistère. That meant that roads and bridges and railroads needed to be built, varying monetary and measuring systems needed to be standardized, and children needed to go to school, with teaching only in French, and consequences for them if they spoke their maternal language. As I noted before, in the middle of the 19th century, a goodly percentage of people in France didn't speak French or spoke it badly because French wasn't necessary to their lives. But after decades of compulsory schooling, pressure from the central government, and general disdain for uncivilized peasants, by World War I, regional languages, along with the oral traditions that were a vital part of them, grew to be considered outdated and backwards, and were gradually left behind. But there were people who wanted to keep the old traditions alive in some way. This photo is of Les Gars de Berry, a music group made up of local musicians who liked to play musique populaire. It was founded in 1888 in the same region that George Sand wrote about, and was in essence a music club. It wasn't anyone's primary job. They didn't have to join a guild to play. They didn't have to save for years to get an instrument. They wore old-style clothes and played old music, which they thought of as old, and went around to entertain at local events and celebrations, with a lot of nostalgia for the past. In fact, Les Gars de Berry was partly founded by a man who ran a cookie factory. It was a great advertising vehicle. Cookies associated with the good old days, the same way they're advertised today. Here you can see an image of an old-fashioned wedding procession down at the bottom, with a bagpipe and hurdy-gurdy, and a woman just behind them with a distaff doing her spinning, which, with manufactured cloth easily available at that point, was not much used by then, to the relief of the women, I'm sure. At the time of Les Gars de Berry in the late 19th century, people were still dancing traditional dances like the bourrée, but it was less and less common away from rural areas. In a way, in central France, the bourrée became a symbol of those rural areas, a way to sell traditional culture to tourists, which is what's happening here. These dancers were employees at the local spa. People from cities came down by train to take the waters in several spa towns in the Massif Central. They are dancing to entertain the clientele. Take a look at the musician, the vielleux on the right, looking at the camera. Here he is in his own publicity photo, alongside his many medals from music competitions. Rather than showing how connected to tradition he is, which he was, he grew up in a tiny village playing old tunes. In his proper suit, he wants you to know his level of refinement. Here's another example of the displacement of traditional culture. The older woman in this photo is wearing a coiffe, the traditional headdress for women. There were different coiffes in every little region of France. This one is fairly simple, but some are super elaborate. Coiffes might have gradually evolved in style or material over time, but women still wore coiffes. But as you see here, the young woman is wearing a stylish modern hat. It's not an evolution of the coiffe, it's a substitution from the larger commercial culture, with styles that change regularly so as to always have something new to sell. And here's a quick look at some different coiffes. Of course, as the context for music and dancing changed and changed again, dancing itself changed as well. I've already mentioned one change to dancing, the introduction of the contredanse and quadrille. Another big development came in the middle of the 19th century with the advent and extreme popularity of couple dances like waltzes, mazurkas, polkas, and schottische. Men and women had danced as partners before, but only standing next to each other, or perhaps at arm's length, not touching. Dancing close up, face to face, arms around each other, was a radical development in terms of the social relationship between men and women. It was also another step away from the sense of community that came from the older circle dances, as dancing became more about individuals and couples than about the group. The polka was introduced in Paris in 1844, and it quickly spread to the provinces. This is an advertisement for a dance teacher in a provincial city offering lessons in quadrilles, waltzes, and polkas. We are far from traditional dancing if you have to pay someone to learn to dance. To give you an idea how popular the polka was, take a look at this auberge in Coulandon, a little village west of Moulins in the far northeast corner of the Auvergne. It was owned by a man named Louis Chevert, who played bagpipes. He said he earned the money to establish his auberge by playing the polka, hence Auberge de la Polka. Everyone wanted to dance the polka. This was the 1850s. By the 1880s, a newspaper in the area said that the polka had replaced the bourrée. Here's an image of people dancing the polka. And here's one of people dancing the mazurka. I do realize it's hard to tell the difference when it's just a photograph. This video is of a couple in the Limousin dancing an old-style mazurka. Pay close attention to how they're moving and what the music sounds like, because later we'll see a more modern version of a mazurka, which is very different. This newspaper clipping is from Andorra in the Pyrenees between France and Spain. But it's not exactly France. The message would be true in France as well. New fashions of dancing replace the old. In this case, in Andorra, new dances replace the jota. The clip even mentions how styles of clothing have moved away from what was traditional. In the early 20th century, of course, there was World War I, which was an absolute devastation in France. The physical destruction was mostly in the Northeast, but the slaughter of so many soldiers was felt everywhere. In talking about the war many decades later, one former soldier said that the regiment from the Auvergne left with 6,000 men and returned with 600. Such losses slowed the changes in traditional dance and dance music in the 1920s because a lot of young people were missing, and it's young people who pushed change. Here we have 3 hurdy-gurdy players leading a wedding procession in the Morvan after the war. Apparently there were lots of weddings after the war, and therefore lots of wedding gigs. There were marriages that had been put off during the war, and second marriages if partners had been lost. By the 30s, though, popular music really started taking over. The advent of the radio made a big difference. The accordion was everywhere, and the fiddlers, bagpipers, and hurdy-gurdy players gradually stopped playing. This man, Jean Segurel, is an illustration of this development. He was born in 1908 in the little village of Chaumet in Corrèze, way out in the country. During the 1920s, Segurel played fiddle for countless balls and weddings and fêtes throughout the area. At the end of the decade, though, he went for his military service. The military had long been a great force for, as one historian wrote, turning peasants into Frenchmen, because, in addition to the sense of patriotism for France it promoted, young men served with others from regions different from their own. Segurel's time in the service opened his world to new people and new music. When he returned home, he decided that instead of fiddle, he would play accordion. Accordions could play both melody and accompaniment, which is a big deal if you're playing solo, and they were much louder than a violin, making them much easier to hear in a crowded cafe or dance hall compared to a fiddler keeping time with his feet. Segurel became very famous and made lots of records, informed by old music, but in a new style. Here's an example of one of his songs about people from Corrèze living in Paris, homesick for the mountains of the Monédière.
Plus que les rues de Paris, elle aime ses bruyères, car c'est là qu'elle a grandi, au pied des côtes jolies. Quand la bruyère est fleurie, au flanc des Monédières, qu'ils sont loin les soucis qu'ont les gens de Paris.
As this new popular music took over, again, new styles of dancing arrived too. If people had been scandalized by the polka, imagine what they thought about the java, illustrated in the bottom right of this sheet music cover. In fact, the new dancing was so scandalous that the Bishop of Quimper in Brittany refused to give the sacraments to anyone caught in a dance hall. No baptisms, no marriages, no funerals in the church. He grudgingly said people could dance the old circle dances at weddings, but absolutely no modern couple dances. And of course, in the 1940s, there was World War II. This image is propaganda from Marshal Pétain and the Nazi sympathizing Vichy government during the war. It says, "The land doesn't lie." It was a fascist, authoritarian regime, and like other regimes of this nature, it promoted rural culture, which was touted as the true essence of the homeland. Folklore dance groups were a way for the Vichy government to promote this idea of what was really French and what was not, or perhaps more accurately, who was really French and who was not. These groups had been around in the years before the war, but during and afterwards there were groupes folkloriques all over France with costumes and choreography and interpretations of the past that came with a lot of wishful thinking. It's great that people like to dance, and the dancing can be done very well, but these groups took dances that used to be done in natural settings and changed them to be something that was aimed towards spectators, manipulated so that they look good on stage. Here is one example. In France, 1968 was a huge time of change, politically and culturally. As it did here, a youth culture developed anti-war, anti-commercialism, going back to the land, making crafts, and so on. And out of that time came the folk revival. It started as a manifestation of this desire to get back to what was considered real and natural. Young people had been playing American folk music in the 1960s and finally got around to thinking that there must be French folk music too. They started singing old French songs and playing old French dance tunes that they found in books. And they started having bals called bal folk to distinguish them from other kinds of bals. At the beginning, bal folk were very much a communal collective affair, with the musicians part of the community. They danced mostly French dances at these events, but also folk dances from other countries. Really, they danced whatever they could come up with. Many people became interested in finding out more about the old traditions. As Olivier Durif told me, he's the guy on the left in this photo of the popular 70s folk group, the Grand Rouge. They wanted to take the music back from the connections with the Vichy government and the costume folklore groups and the modern commercial accordion playing. They wondered if there was anybody left in rural corners of the country who still played the old tunes. So they started wandering around the forgotten back of beyonds of France, which at that time were still pretty isolated, asking everyone if they knew any older musicians. And these collectors found that there were still a lot of musicians around, older men who had played for countless weddings and celebrations prior to World War II and hadn't really played since. Here's a photo of the Grand Rouge crew and friends with some of the fiddlers they met in the Auvergne and Limousin, who they became really close to. The young people were delighted with and hugely appreciative of the warm welcome they received, and the older people were thrilled that someone was interested in their music again. It had been so long since anyone had been. In the front row on the right, you can see the fiddler Léon Perrat, who, speaking of how their interest amazed him, later said to the guys, "The day you first came to me asking about fiddling, I couldn't have been more surprised if it had been Jesus Christ at the door." Another fiddler, enjoying the visit so much, kept calling one of the young collectors to say he had remembered some more of the old tunes, so could he please come back. It was only later that he admitted that he liked the visit so much that he had composed new tunes to have something more to share. Here's a bit of Léon Perrat playing a three-tambouret. That's him in the photo, but there's only audio, no video. You'll hear his foot tapping. The rhythm for the dancers, called la cadence, was vitally important, and everyone kept that rhythm with their feet when they played, considering it an integral part of the music. But the cadence doesn't always line up with the phrasing of the melody, which is a very cool thing about these bourrées. It might sound to you that he was playing out of tune, maybe because he was old and out of practice, but he played the bourrée like that because to him, That's what a bourrée was supposed to sound like. All this collecting influenced the bal folk scene, and people living in the various regions where there were still local traditions, or at least still some people who remembered the local traditions, started being interested in what was around them, rather than just playing and dancing this and that, as they had done at the early bal folk. They started associations to sponsor bals, held workshops to learn tunes and dances. In the 1980s, the government even helped develop regional centers for traditional music to support research and collecting. That work created an absolute treasure trove of source material, and many of these collections can now be found on a wonderful website called Le Patrimoine Oral that holds the archives of many of these regional centers. There's a link to it on the resource page. This world of the trad revival, that's trad as in traditional, continues to thrive in many regions. At the beginning, there might have been debates about whether a dance or tune was authentic or not, or done authentically, but by now, everyone is very aware that they cannot replicate what came before. You can learn traditional dances, but you can't carry on the same tradition of dancing, as the cultural world that the dances were a part of no longer exists. And by now, too, there's more acknowledgement that the older musicians the young people met in the 70s and 80s had lived in a world of sheet music, radio, and recordings. And their repertoires included all kinds of non-traditional music too, like pieces from popular turn-of-the-century operettas, even if they might have been played in a musician's regional style. So here are some examples of dancing at these kind of bals. This first one is of a bourrée contest at Les Volcaniques, a summer festival and workshop run by the association Les Braillots, a little north of Clermont-Ferrand in Auvergne, which is where I learned to play French fiddle. You'll hear a group called Airbag playing two kinds of bagpipes, a grande cornemuse and two musettes béchonnées. Stopping these videos very abruptly because I get into listening and then I think, oh no, there's time. I have to go to the next thing. I love that tune. Next is a branles from the Pyrenees, filmed this past July at the Festival Le Son Continu in Barr. You'll see someone playing a tambourin, which is a Gascon string drum, tapped with a mallet with one hand, while the other hand plays a three-holed flute. Here's a band from the Vendée called Arbre des Thorns playing Scottish at the same festival. It was the first dance of the night, so you can still see the dance floor. In another 10 minutes, there will be hardly any room to move. make you want to go? I have in my resource document, there are lists of festivals in France that you can go to. And here is the band Choc Boom from Poitou playing a branle de Noirmoutier. Currently, one could say there are three realms of folk dancing in France. The folkloric dance groups, which continue in many places, the world of the revival trad balls that we just looked at, and a newer realm of bal folk, which is now spread throughout Europe. While the trad world is still strongly rooted in a sense of place, bal folk world has gradually left those roots behind. This makes sense, as many people who just enjoy dancing to the wonderful music have no connection to old rural culture. They never met the older musicians, never went to a dance in a little village. They don't even know what it looked like in the places where the dances come from. When bal folk spread to other countries, they really had no connection to France and its traditions at all. And for younger people, who are a large part of the current bal folk scene, that old world was lost long before they were even born. So bal folk, though developing from the traditional music and dance revival, became something more modern and more reflective of current culture. The musicians are professionals, and the standard of musicianship is very high. There's newly composed music that fits the various dances and new ways of dancing. Remember the video I showed you of the couple dancing the mazurka outdoors to a lone fiddler? Here's the modern bal folk take on the mazurka, which is an enormously popular dance in bal folk world today. The music is by the accordionist Gérard Godon. Another change from trad bals to modern bal folk is that in bal folk there tends to be only one way of doing each dance. It makes the dances much easier to learn. You don't need a workshop to get started, which makes the dancing way more accessible for more people. The flip side of this, of course, is that a lot of nuance and variation is lost. For example, there are many ways of doing a bourrée, but if the band at a bal folk plays a bourrée in two, everyone dances this dance. The band in this video is called Toc Toc Toc. Another difference in bal folk is that older music styles are sometimes mixed with new styles and genres. This is a rondeau en couple, a couple rondeau, done at the Grand Bal of Europe, a 2-week-long participatory dance festival held in late July in Genetin, near Moulins. The duo playing is called Tuki Puki. One of the musicians is from Paris and the other is from Senegal. And here's the band Beat Boit Trio playing their very contemporary style for a Ride from Brittany.
J'amène oui d'accord un pied qui pleure tes bottins yeah. Maintenant encore un pied qui pleure tes bottins too. Maintenant oui d'accord un pied qui pleure tes bottins yeah. Qui pleure tes bottins qui donnera des tonnes.
So ball folk is now well established all over Europe, but we're just starting to get it going here in the US. There's a regular dance here in Maryland that I play for, and another in Brattleboro, Vermont, plus occasional dances in the Chicago area, in Minneapolis, and in other places as well. And if anyone wants to have a ball at their Alliance, I am ready to come with my fiddle in hand and teach you how to do it. I'd like to finish with one last image of the people whose traditions I've been talking about, in case the hip-hop Ride knocked them out of your consciousness. For me, as an historian and ethnomusicologist, I find fascinating the story of how traditional dance and dance music evolved over time and how that reflects changes in society. But as a musician, one that's firmly in the trad camp, it's the connection to the people that made this music that really moves me. And I'm going to stop my screen share, and I am going to show my ceiling. No, that's not. There we go. And I am going to tell you a little bit about that. So let's hold on one sec. Let me get organized here. Okay. Where was I? Okay. As a musician, that's what I wanted to talk about. It's the connection to the people that made this music that really moves me. When I play, I always have in mind that this music and this dance comes from real people to whom it was part of their lives, like the food they ate and the work they did. They held it close in the years when everyone else seemed to have lost interest. And when young people came knocking on their doors, young people who came from a totally different world from their own, they open-heartedly and generously passed it on. That legacy has since been generously passed on to me by those same young people, though, as these things go, they are no longer young. It was an amazing gift to them. It's an amazing gift to me, and I have to say, I really treasure it. Thank you so much to the National Federation of Alliance Française for having me, to Federation board member Charles Coulon for all his help and support. Thanks also to National Program Manager Melissa Sora, and to all of you for tuning in. I welcome any questions or comments you might have.
Super, merci beaucoup. Thank you so much, Leslie. A very, very great overview, and I've seen it at this point, 3 or 4 times, I believe, and it's it's always a pleasure to go through and revive this history, and and if anything, the postcards, the old postcards, which I'm a big old postcard fan myself, so it's always fun to see those. We did have a couple of things that came in the in the chat, and by the way, please feel free to enter your questions in there. One question from Kristen earlier. There are modern ballet steps called pas de bourrée and bourrée. I don't know if you're familiar with those, and if you can talk to them, and where the origins might be.
My guess is they all come from the same source, but I don't know exactly what that source is. So that's all this winter. I researched this that I can do next winter's research.
All right, good. There's always fascinating research that can be done, right? Miriam says, this is fascinating and informative. And yeah, the video clips were great. She was curious about the Congo dance, and if the name of the dance was connected to the colonies and what the history behind it.
No one knows. There's all sorts of theories, but I don't buy any of them or the ones I've heard. So nobody really knows why they call it a Congo.
And
Sorry.
her and another question that she had was the dancing from the French Antilles might also have been included in the tradition of French dances and balls that originated there during the colonial era. So maybe. Um, let's see from Lee's, David Walkowitz has written about the parallel evolution from village to 70s folk revival of English country dance and also contredance in his book City Folk. And it would kind of be interesting to cross compare. And I know that there has been a revival of other dance forms like, yeah, contra and English country dance comparable to the to bal folk, I suppose. So uh, quite a couple of from Monica, are there different words in French for fiddle and violin like in English?
No, they say violon, but someone who plays violon to play folk music is a violoneux or a violonneuse, and someone who plays classical or something else is a violiniste.
Hmm.
The
Okay.
instrument's the same.
Great. And a question from Christine, which is I know as far as the dances that were done in Quebec, I know the dances in Quebec tend to be more of like the square dance variety, but I'm wondering, yes, if there is any traditions from the French regions that might have evolved in Quebec, considering that a lot of people from parts of like the Vendée and the Gascogne and places like that migrated to Quebec.
There are people doing research into, particularly in Poitou and Vendée, that area. So there's lots of connections, particularly in vocal music, because that's something that can stick. Um, in terms of the dance music, Quebec was taken over by the English really early on, and the influence of Scottish and Irish music is very heavy there. It's its own music, but the dance, like the squares they do, quadrilles, they all come from the same place. They were all over the place. So there's still people exploring those connections, but they're kind of hard to put your finger on.
For what instruments did the troubadours play?
I don't know. I haven't researched the troubadours. That is before my era.
Is that probably more like around like the medieval Renaissance? So that be,
Exactly.
more associated with that? Yeah. Um, yeah, my sense is they probably, yeah. They let's see. Any other questions from please feel free to put them in the chat. And as always, we have been recording this presentation, and we'll be doing a couple of minor edits. Just to there are a couple of videos that sadly we cannot put on our recording for mostly copywriting purposes, but we will also have a resource guide that Leslie has put together, and we'll be sharing that. And yeah, one quick question also from Christine. The farandole, is that Provençal origin? Is that
Yes,
yeah?
that is from Provence, but Provence is not one of the areas I know,
Yeah,
so I didn't
it's
put that in.
it is a fascinating area too, in terms of the farandole and the traditions and the pastorals, and that's another area that can be investigating. Any thoughts on the differences between the bourrée à deux temps et à trois temps?
That's another book. Um, the bourrée toiton was originally called a montagnard. It wasn't called a bourrée. Came from the mountains, so that's what people in the mountains did. A bourrée de temps is much more connected to music from further north. There are many different bourrées and ways of doing them, but they're kind of lost in Berry, where and they weren't quite as lost in the Auvergne and Limousin. So so they're different. They're very different in feel. I find the bourrées in 3 are very deep. They're great. That's my favorite music, the soul music of the Massif Central.
Yep.
But and bourrées in 2 are much more connected to English music.
Cool. Yeah, so we had a whole bunch of comments in the chat, thanking you for your time and saying this was an excellent presentation. And yes, we will have the list of various resources that Leslie's been kind enough to put together for us, that have different links to groups and websites and Facebook groups that you can go and check out to find out more about this. And maybe get hooked on it. Why not? This it's a fascinating I do a lot of folk dancing myself, so I'm very I'm preaching to I'm preaching to you all in a way, so we're spreading the gospel of Balfolk about today. And there are also recreational folk dance groups in your communities, believe it or not, in various parts of the country where you can actually do things that resemble Balfolk and that have Balfolk in them as well. So with that, I think we'll once again, thanks to Leslie for your time, and thanks Melissa for your help putting this event together. And we certainly hope you have a great evening, maybe finding Balfolk music on YouTube or Spotify or whatever to listen to for the rest of your evening, and lull you into the weekend.
Thank you, everybody. Charles, did you put the resource document in the chat by any chance? Or Melissa, could you do that? I don't know if that's at hand, or we'll just wait for the recording.
It'll be going out shortly in an email to all of the registrants.
Great. Thank you so much.
You're
Great.
welcome. Thank you, Leslie.
So thank you very much once again to everyone, and hope to see you at a future Federation Cultural Program again. So, and enjoy your evening. Bonne soirée.